First on BBC One.
Good evening and welcome to episode 40, the Big 40 of the History CV of Britain. I'm your host, Paul, and this evening I'll be talking to Ralph Ellis, author of a dozen or so books on ancient history, and we'll be discussing his take and research on King Arthur. First of all, a brief apology. I'm fighting off a cold at the moment, so I'm slightly blocked up and a bit, as you can imagine, so apologies for that, but the show must go on. Now, it's been quite a week on the Wilson and Blackett front. So somebody sent me a video during the week of a couple of urban explorers who gained access to Wilson and Blackett's property. Well, I've actually got a few notes here because I wanted to speak about it briefly. The first thing is, I think it was very sad to see the neglect of Alan's house. In these situations, of course, it's the responsibility of the executor of the will to clear the property and take responsibility for any valuable materials. Sometimes the family get involved in this process. It's not the responsibility of fans and supporters of those two authors to do that job. That's one thing I would like to say on that. As for urban exploring, if I put myself in their shoes, personally, I would feel very uncomfortable rifling through the possessions of people who have only been deceased for a couple of years. Now, I might sound a little bit old-fashioned when I say that, I don't know, but it's not something that I find very tasteful, particularly. Talking of which, someone told me a story about a couple of urban explorers recently where they entered a property, started rummaging around and going through various possessions of the person. Then they went upstairs and found an old lady in bed who was obviously very frightened. And she was like, who are you? Why are you here? And to be fair to them, they were very apologetic, but they still uploaded the video. So I just find the whole thing, quite distasteful, if I'm honest with you. As for Wilson and Blackett's property, the latest I heard is that the property has been bought up by a property developer and everything is currently being managed by a local estate agent. So, yes, overall, I think it's quite a sad story, really. Not something that I enjoyed watching at all. And I feel a bit sorry for them. Anyway, okay, so let's see who's in the chat box this evening. We have David J with us. Good to see you, David. Philip A. Demick is with us. I think I've seen your name before. Good to see you, Philip. Merlin's Boys is also with us. Hello, Merlin's Boy. Hugh Evans is here. Good evening, Hugh. Hope you're well. Good old John of Tadley is with us in the chat box. Good to see you, John. Daniela Holland. Mark Manning. Lovely to see you. Melissa Campbell. Hope you're well, Melissa. Now, there's a name I've not seen for a while. Blimey. Stinky Paradox is with us this evening. It's great to see you, Stinky. Stinky is somebody that used to watch my Ralph videos on my old channel, Nutrient Nirvana. So good to see you there, Stinky. And wow, it's really busy this evening. We have Chris Wood with us. We have my friend Lisa in America, Craft-O-Matic. Blimey. Okay. Petrushka Polyakov is here. Hello, Petrushka. Hope you're well. And blimey. I'm not even going to try and say that, but you're very welcome. Hope you enjoy the show. Okay, right. Brilliant. Right. I would like to ask you all a question. Something that's been on my mind now for a few days, and I've been having conversations with a couple of people. That's my cat, if you can hear in the background. So my question for you this week is this: is there such a thing as hidden history? Is it a thing? Is it real? And if so, why is there hidden history, and who would want to hide history from us? Okay, and just to put this into context quickly, I'm a huge fan of the Britain's Hidden History YouTube channel. Huge fan of Peter and Adam and what they're doing over there. I used to watch Ross Broadstock's lives 2 or 3 years ago. So I just want to ask that question because it's something that's been on my mind for a while now. So is there such a thing as hidden history? And if there is, why is it hidden? How do we know it's hidden? Who's behind it? And why would they do something like that? I think this is something that we need to get on top of and start talking about. Anyway, right, okay. Don't think I've forgotten anything. So before I bring my guest on this evening, I want to show you 4 of his books. He's written, as I mentioned, about a dozen books, blimey, and they're big. So now I spent most of the pandemic reading these books, and they were absolutely incredible. Now let's get them in the right order. So the reason why I'm showing you these 4 books is because this one, which was the last book in what Ralph calls his the 4-part trilogy of the Jesus story, the historical Jesus. This one was called the Grail Cypher, and this one will no doubt come up in our conversation this evening because it's mainly focused really on Arthurian history. But the first book in the series was called Cleopatra to Christ. Why was the birth of a poor carpenter in the 1st century AD attended by the Persian Magi, the Persian kingmakers? Why was Jesus later known as the King of the Jews? There is a great deal of evidence within the New Testament that demonstrates that Jesus was actually of royal blood. But if this is so, then from which royal family was he descended? So, and no strand is left unturned in that book. The follow-up to that, let's get this right, was this book, King Jesus. Notice the shield. Okay, that was the second book in the series, and it was I think it was in this book where the identity of the historical Jesus was revealed by Ralph for the first time. It was either this one or the next one. Here is the third book, and this has got a really great cover on it. Okay, so what you can see there is a coin, I believe, of Monobazus II. Monobazus translates as the only king, and he was one of the 2 leaders, if I remember rightly, of the Jewish revolt. There she is again, in AD 70. So bear that in mind. Have a look at this uniform that the chap is wearing. This is King Jesus on the front of the book, because this relates to the Hucock mosaic that I've shown on the CV show. And this cover came out before the Hucock mosaic was discovered, and the uniform and the clothes here were pretty much identical, which is incredible. So And then we come to the final part, the Grail Cypher. And this was the conclusion to that series. And as you can see, there's about 600 odd pages here. It's a very deep dive into this history. Yeah, I won't spoil it. So anyway, so there we go. So I think we're just about ready now to bring on our guest for this evening. So bear with me a second. I might be a little bit slower than usual, I'm afraid, tonight, because I am fighting off a cold, which I'm doing. I felt really rough earlier. I'm feeling better now because I've been using ascorbic acid all day, which is the main component of vitamin C. And it's very, very useful. Okay, so without further ado, enough waffle from me. Please give a very warm welcome to our guest for this evening, Mr. Ralph Ellis. Hello, Ralph.
Good evening, everybody. Glad to see all some well-known faces back again.
Yes.
Welcome, one and all.
It's been a while. How have you been keeping? All right?
Yeah, doing very well. I haven't been writing that much. I've been reading, and I've been involving myself in a little bit of political debate, because within political debate, people don't seem to know their history very well. So I've been assisting with that. Yeah, so keeping myself busy. Retired now, so
yes,
I've got some extra time.
Happy retirement.
Yes.
And I would really love to talk to you about some of the political things that you've been focusing on, but we try to keep this show politics free, if you like.
Yes,
so,
that's probably wise.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so where should we start? We've been covering Arthur now for a few episodes on the History CV of Britain, and we've got many different viewpoints and opinions on this, and we've had some very good researchers on. So I suppose the first question I should ask you, Ralph, is how did you initially become interested in this Arthur story?
Well, because it dovetailed with my gospel research. So gospel research, obviously, about the Near East. And the Arthurian story only arrives, it suddenly blossomed after the Knights Templar came back from the Middle East. And so there was a deep connection there, and there was lots of synergies, which I didn't know about, because if you read the classical investigations into the Arthurian story, you'll get the same old stories all the time, and they leave out a lot of the information which I think is pertinent. They gloss over it because it's not kosher, you might say. You know, the Arthurian legend has its own creed, and people stay within the confines of that creed. And they don't want to read the other manuscripts because there's an awful lot of Arthurian manuscripts that don't agree with standard Arthurian legend. Things like High History. We'll look at the cover in a minute. High History says that Arthur was the most evil king ever. You can see that some people had a different view of this. There's a quote here. I might as well just give it a quick quote. So a lady is walking through the forest and she meets King Arthur, but she doesn't know it's King Arthur. It's just a knight. And she says, I was thinking of going to King Arthur's court, but I have met 20 knights, and each told me that the court of King Arthur is the most vile in the whole world. And all the knights of the Round Table have renounced it because of its badness. Who cares for Arthur's good beginning when his end is so bad? And it is distasteful that a decent knight such as you should have the same name as such an evil king.
Wow.
That's High History. High History is a very, very dark tale about King Arthur, and it's obviously written from the opposing viewpoint. You know, if you have a king, obviously you have your supporters and you have your detractors. And this is obviously an Arthurian manuscript from the detractors. So that gives you a slightly different view of the Arthurian story. And also, to me, it gives us an idea that this might be a true story. I mean, you wouldn't write the opposing view of King Arthur if it was just all fantasy, if it was just a fictional story. That seems to suggest to me that this was a real king, and some people opposed that real king. Yeah, it's a very dark tale, is High History. Has a lot of criticism of Christianity in it too. This is where it starts dovetailing with my other work on the Christian story. For instance, it has the king who kills and boils his son and then cuts him up to give all of the meat to his congregation. Well, obviously, that's the Eucharist.
Yes.
That's taking the mickey out of the Eucharist. I mean, that's highly heretical. But, you know, that occurs within this book. And he also has his wife, who he suspects of adultery. And so he flays her until all her skin falls off and then shoves a lance through her chest. It's all gruesome stuff, you know. This is a 13th, 12th century manuscript. This is going back into the early Middle Ages, and of course that is a parody. You wouldn't call it a parody anyway. It's a simile of the crucifixion of Jesus, who was flayed and then had a spear thrust in his side. So again, they're making a mockery of the crucifixion story. So you can see within these stories that religio-political points were being made within these stories. They're not just a fantasy story for the children. There's a serious side behind them, and I found that very interesting. And High History, we'll come on to this because I think you've got some other questions on this, but High History is also heretical because it says it was written by Josephus Flavius.
I was about to ask you who wrote
so
it.
We'll come on to that later, maybe.
Yes. Okay. So, well, my next question was going to be, who was King Arthur?
Not sure I can answer that straight away without going into some of the background behind it, because the background affects, because you'll never believe what I'm going to say if you don't have the background behind it.
Of course.
And the background comes from what High History is saying, and it's also in History of the Grail, which comes out of the Vulgate cycle. This is one of 10 volumes, would you believe? This is the one that most people miss out when they're doing the research, because it's about 5,000 pages.
Long,
you don't want to be reading that for bedtime. Mind you, it'll send you to sleep, that's for sure. But what they allude to in these books is that this is a much older story, and it was told by Josephus Flavius. So, I mean, for instance, it says that the good clerk who wrote this story is called Josephus in both of those books. And it says, Josephus, the good clerk, tells us that the good knight is Sir Percival, had come, of whom you shall hear the name presently. So it's talking about Josephus writing these stories. Hear you the history of the most holy vessel that is called the Grail. Josephus has set this in remembrance by annunciation of a voice of an angel, that the truth might be known. And then it says, the good knight, that's Percival again, was of the lineage of Joseph of Arimathea. So again, this is going back to the gospel story. So Arthurian knights of the Round Table were descended from Joseph of Arimathea. And this Joseph was Percival's mother's uncle. And he had been a soldier who had been a soldier of Pilate for 7 years. So that's saying that Joseph of Arimathea worked for Pilate. There's another story that says he worked for Vespasian. Of this lineage was the good knight, for whose sake this high history was treated. This comes from High History, that book we were talking about. Iglaze was his mother's name, and King Fisherman was his uncle. And the king of the lower folk was named Peles. And the head of the lineage on his father's side was Nicodemus. Nicodemus was the person who dressed Jesus after his death. So what it's saying here is that Sir Percival was the nephew of Joseph of Arimathea. Okay, so Sir Percival was a 1st century character from the Near East. And all the way through these books, we get these hints that this is a much older story, that it doesn't come from the 6th century. And we'll look at that in a minute, because that's important as well. So we get all of these hints that this is a different story. It's much older. It's linked to the gospel story. And here's another one. This is the ancient donkey. It says King Hermit. There are various kings here. There's the wounded king, the fisher king, King Hermit, who's normally Peles. King Hermit came from the forest and could not find his nephew, who is Percival, Sir Percival. And he is mounted on a white mule that he had there. The mule had a star on her forehead in the shape of a red cross. Josephus, the good clerk, again, this is written by Josephus, tells us that this same mule belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. So the mule that Sir Percival owned belonged to Joseph of Arimathea. And then it goes on to tell us that Josephus, who is the good clerk who wrote the story, was the son of Joseph of Arimathea. Right, so we're mixing and matching a lot of different histories here to arrive at Arthurian legend. And the reason you probably don't know about this, you've not heard about it, is it conflicts completely with the narrative that's been established for King Arthur. You know, that he's a Dark Age king, 6th century, 5th century, whatever, something to do with the Wales and the Celts and whatever, and Anglo-Saxons and all the rest. But this is pointing at a very different origin to this story. And that's what I first found when I started looking at these books. An interesting one, if people are interested, because the Vulgate cycle is it's 10 volumes. You don't want to read it. This one's a nice, interesting one, Merlin and the Grail. This is, again, it's an original manuscript going back to the 13th century.
This is Thomas Mallory?
No, this is Robert de Boron.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
And it's a bit of a summary of the Vulgate cycle. So it gives you a good idea of what the Vulgate cycle is going to tell you. And so that's a good one to read. And it has a lot of the heretical stuff in that book as well. So basically, from Arthurian legend, we get, because it's all about Joseph of Arimathea, of course, which, again, it's another 1st century character from the Near East. So Joseph of Arimathea was a Jewish aristocrat and priest. He was a Judaic soldier who worked for Vespasian for 7 years. That comes from Merlin and the Grail again. So he worked for the Romans. This is Joseph of Arimathea. He worked for the Romans. He worked for Vespasian. He was a member of the Sanhedrin after the Jewish revolt. He was a scribe or a clerk, because they mix and match Joseph of Arimathea and Josephus. The names get muddled. He was a scribe or a clerk who wrote the religious history of the Jews. A scribe, he was a Roman soldier who took King Jesus down from the cross, according to Josephus. And so, yes, who was all of those things? Well, the answer, of course, is Josephus Flavius, and this has caused some consternation. I mean, this is known about. This is not simply just my research. I'm not the first person to see this, but you won't see it in classical Arthurian history. So we go back to Nietzsche. Nietzsche was a German-American, sometimes said to be the father of Arthurian research. He's early 20th century, I think, Nietzsche. Anyway, Nietzsche says, the role of Josephus in the story, the good scribe, the role of Josephus is of greater importance in our work than that of Joseph of Arimathea. It is Josephus to whom we owe the tale, and he is known as the good clerk and the good hermit. Twice the text calls him simply Joseph, and twice he is called Josephus. Nevertheless, it is now generally supposed that the confusion of these two Josephs, Joseph of Arimathea and Josephus Flavius, the Jewish historian, gave rise to the legend of Joseph and his son Josephus, as mentioned in the text. So that's what it's saying. So we have a lot of the story, Arthurian legend, according to these books, is set in the Near East, and a lot of it is about Joseph of Arimathea, of course. And then Brugger takes up. Brugger is another early Arthurian historian, again, early 20th century, I think. And Brugger says, what did he write? Ernest Brugger, Zeitschrift für Französischsprach und Literature. There you go. He's German, obviously. 1906 it was written. He says, because even if Josephus Flavius was a very well known as a historian, and even much respected and held as a Christian historian, it remains striking that he could record events from British history that occurred many centuries after his death. I think these oddities are only the result of a confusion. So he's recognizing all of these problems and saying, no, they've just got themselves in a muddle, because Josephus Flavius in the 1st century cannot be writing about King Arthur in the Dark Ages of Britain. It makes no sense. Well, only because he couldn't see what the problem was here and how to overcome that, because it sort of undermines Arthurian legend as we understand it. So yeah, that's some of the early stuff that I was looking at that got me interested in this, because it's placing the origins of Arthurian legend back into the very story that I've been researching for my Jesus King of Edessa. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. So we might as well look at why this is not a British story. To back up, so we've got this idea that maybe it's something to do with the Near East. So why is it not a British story? Well, it's not a British story because there is no Arthur. And even my nemesis, Guy Housel, said this. We were talking before we started the show about Guy Housel. He's a classical academic who wrote a book about King Arthur that basically said there is no such thing because he can't find it in the historical record. And I was a bit peeved about this guy because he got a huge, great grant from the Cadbury or the Pears soap. Anyway, one of these old institutions, they still have grants that they give out to people. And he got something like £150,000 for writing this book. And I got nothing, of course, even though I made an application to the same group. Anyway, so his short little booklet, because it was only about 150 pages or something, basically said there is no King Arthur. And of course, a lot of classical historians will say that there is no King Arthur because there is no history of Arthur. And for the most part, they're correct. So if we go back to the original manuscripts, there's precious little to go on, really, isn't it? I mean, this was the Dark Ages. There was Gildas, Ruin and Conquest of Britain, which is 5th. You got it. There you go. Ruin and Conquest of Britain. 5th or 6th century. There is no King Arthur in it. So, Gildas is contemporary to when we think Arthur should have been around, and he writes nothing. Sorry, I've got a dog that's chewing something down here. No mention of King Arthur at all. There is no Arthur. And then we come to the Venerable Bede, who writes the Ecclesiastical History of English, 8th century. Again, no mention of King Arthur. He's just not there in his texts. And then we come on to Nennius. You've got Nennius, there we go. A 9th century. Can you hear all these ripping noises down below me or not? Oh,
no, I can't.
Okay.
No,
I'll leave him to it then. He's just tearing up. Luckily, it's not a book. It's just a folder. Nennius, History of the Britons, 9th century. And this is the first time we get a mention of Arthur. And now we get a warrior Arthur. It's a Dux Bellum, a warlord, basically. But it's not a King Arthur. There is no Arthurian story. There is no Camelot. There's no Excalibur. There's no Lancelot or Round Tables or anything.
He really just mentions the 12 battles, doesn't he?
That's about it. And there is a clue to what they're talking about. Because the birth story, when we get on later to Geoffrey of Monmouth, the birth story, conception and birth of King Arthur, is the same as Hercules. It's the same story. So when they're talking about a Dux Bellorum, a warlord called King Arthur, they're just regurgitating the story of Hercules and his 12 labors of Hercules. And that's why we get the 12 battles of Arthur. It's the Herculean story. It has nothing to do with King Arthur. They're looking for a warrior that will help them in battles, you know. And of course, who's going to help you in battles? Well, it's going to be Hercules is going to help you. So there is no King Arthur. We're all the way up to the 9th century. There is no King Arthur. Then we get William of Malmesbury, Chronicle of the English Kings, 12th century, 1125 roughly. No Arthur. Henry of Huntingdon, very good history of the English kings. Again, we get this Dux Bellorum, we get this warlord called Arthur, but there is no King Arthur. There is no Arthurian story. And then suddenly, so we've gone all the way up to the 12th century. We end up at 1135, and suddenly we get Geoffrey of Monmouth and Walter of Oxford, History of the Kings of Britain, which is and Geoffrey of Monmouth is the well-known one. And suddenly we get the full story. It all comes out just from nowhere. So there's been no history for like 600 years. And suddenly we get this complete history of Arthur. And it happens just 20 years after the Knights Templar were established, just after the Crusades. And remember, the first crusade set off in 1096, and it didn't go to Jerusalem. It went to Edessa. And
just for people who might not know where Edessa is, or was, I should say, could you just tell us where it was? Located?
Do I have a image? Actually, I don't think I have an image of that on this one. No. Okay, so it's north of Syria, in northern Syria. So if you go from Aleppo and head north, you arrive at Edessa. Now, it's called Sanliurfa, and in the modern era, it's actually in modern Turkey, but it used to be in Syria. So it's just north of Aleppo, basically. So we're talking about the Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. Just across, it's in Mesopotamia, actually, because it's across the Euphrates. So the first crusade didn't go south and go to Jerusalem. They went straight on, they went across the Euphrates, and they liberated Edessa from Muslim oppression. And there was a good reason for doing that, because I'd just written a whole book about Jesus coming from Edessa, and this was known about. And it's not in that book of mine, because I didn't know about it then, but in the 9th, 10th century, this was known about. So if we move on very slightly from that to the time of Alfred the Great, so Alfred the Great is considered to be the first sort of English king. We're talking 900s, I suppose, for Alfred the Great.
Mm-hmm.
While he was battling with Saxons and whatever coming into the country, he actually sent the Bishop of Salisbury to Edessa and to India to go and see the Church of Edessa in India, which was founded by St. Thomas, the brother of Jesus. And this is the book on that, which is it's the history of the Church of Malabar, which was discovered in 1501 by the Portuguese. And this is the colophons. So this book was written in 1694.
Wow.
This is not an original. It would be expensive.
Yeah.
It's only a copy.
There's long been a train of thought, I suppose, that Jesus survived the crucifixion and went to India himself.
Yeah, that was his brother, because Jesus had a twin brother, Judas Thomas, or his full name was Judas Thomas Didymus Lebbaeus Thaddeus. From Thaddeus we get Addai, which is the common name that is used in a lot of these texts. And he is the one who is supposed to have gone to India, and as it says, to the Church of Malabar, which is still there now, the Church of Malabar. There are still 7 churches there, and they are the first Christian churches to be established in the whole of the world, established in AD 57, if I remember correctly. So a lot of this was known about at an early age. So Alfred the Great knew about many of these mysteries. That's why he sent the Bishop of Salisbury on a pilgrimage to take tribute to the Church of Edessa and go to the Church of Edessa in India. So all of this would have been known about in that era. They knew about Edessa, which is why the first crusade went to Edessa. That story was still known. It's not known nowadays. Until I wrote my books, nobody knew anything about it. But it was known about during the crusading era. And so they went to Edessa to go and find some ancient histories pertinent to Christianity. And I think they probably succeeded. And suddenly, just 30 years after they went there, we suddenly get Arthurian legend. All of a sudden, complete. No history before that. Suddenly comes out of the middle of nowhere, we get Arthurian legend. And this story doesn't, for many reasons, this story is not a British story. We can go on with these texts, because we get Geoffrey of Monmouth. This is 1135. We get Geoffrey of Monmouth, Walter of Oxford, which is the Tysilio manuscript, which are identical, basically. And then we get Newborough. So then we get William of Newborough, 1160. So just after Arthurian legend comes out. And Newborough, William Newborough, says, only a person ignorant of, he's talking about Geoffrey of Monmouth here. Only a person ignorant of ancient history can for a moment doubt how impertinently and impudently Monmouth falsifies the history in every respect. Whatever Geoffrey has written is a fiction, invented either by himself or by others, and promulgated either through an unchecked propensity to falsehood or a desire to please the Britons. For how would the elder historians, who were ever anxious to omit nothing remarkable, and even recorded trivial circumstances, pass by unnoticed so incomparable a man and such surpassing deeds as King Arthur? How could they, I repeat, by their silence, suppress Arthur, a British monarch who was superior to Alexander the Great? So here we are, only 30 years after Geoffrey of Monmouth, and William of Newburgh is saying that the whole thing is a complete hoax. It's all fabricated, it's nonsense. So even in this early era, people knew that the Arthurian story was potentially fiction. Someone had invented it, and it reads like that. And especially when you read the whole of the Vulgate cycle as well, it reads as though it's anomalous. It doesn't belong to British history. And it doesn't. And Mallory says the same. So Thomas Mallory is very late on this, and it's the worst of all of them. I wouldn't even bother with Thomas Mallory. It's a late Arthurian history, and it's quite clear that Thomas Mallory had no idea what it was all about. He thought it was a story about King Arthur. Of course, it's not. But Thomas Mallory only wrote his book because his book is Mort d'Arthur, of course. He only wrote the book because he couldn't find a British King Arthur. So there are no manuscripts from Britain about King Arthur, and that's a bit odd. So Mallory says, for in all places, Christian and heathen, King Arthur is reputed. He is more spoken of beyond the sea, more books made of his noble acts than there be in England. And they are in Deutsch, Italian, Spanish, Greekish, and Frenchish. But he couldn't find any British manuscripts. Interesting, isn't it? The only place you cannot find an Arthurian manuscript is Wales or England, because even the ones that people keep on about, Geoffrey of Monmouth and Walter of Oxford, their manuscript didn't come from Wales. They say at the end of their story that their manuscript came from Brittany. It came from Normandy and Brittany. It's a French manuscript, which Walter of Oxford translated, and I'm just trying to remember, actually, it was written in Welsh and Latin. But it's not a Welsh history. It came from northern France. So we don't have any manuscripts that talk about King Arthur.
Sorry, Ralph. Is it true that some people in the 5th, 6th century left Britain and went to places like Brittany and Normandy to escape the Saxons?
The main exodus was during the reign of, we had a usurper emperor in the late 300s. And I forget his name for a minute, it'll come to me. A lot of the Britons escaped to Brittany at that time.
Right.
Or rather, they didn't escape. We had a usurper emperor of Britain who tried to take over the Roman Empire. And he campaigned through France with his British army, because remember, Britain was unusual in that it had like 3 legions. It had always...
It wasn't Vortigern, was it?
No, not Vortigern. No, this is... I'll remember in a minute.
Okay, sorry.
Let me quickly look up. So... because it's important, I suppose.
Is it in Geoffrey?
No.
Anybody out there know the name of this usurper?
There were 2, actually. There was one No, not Constantine III. That was a later one. So Constantine III was another British usurper, emperor. Oh, I can't even get wiki. Stupid thing. Constantine. No, they're all talking. Magnus Maximus. There we go.
Oh, of course,
Magnus
yeah.
Maximus. Anyway, his troops, rather than coming back to Britain, a lot of them stayed in France, and they escaped because obviously their rebellion failed and they were wanted men. And so instead of coming back to Britain, most of his army went to Brittany. So there was an awful lot of Britons ended up in Brittany because of that, because of Magnus Maximus. Yeah, there was a lot going on in that late Roman era before the Western Roman Empire failed. So yes, I was going to show you that this is not a British story, and we might as well have a look at some images for that. Because the question to viewers, if you've not read my books, the question to viewers is, what is the earliest sculpture of King Arthur? Where do we find the earliest sculpture of King Arthur? Because that's an interesting question, because this is supposed to be a Welsh or a British story. So where would we find all of these sculptures, very early sculptures of King Arthur? Yeah, this is high history. We were talking about high history. This is just the cover to that particular book. This is my Grail Cypher. This is the Vulgate cycle. If anyone wants to plow their way through the Vulgate cycle, keep you going forever, that will. Well, the answer to the question is the earliest sculpture we have of King Arthur is this one. Here we go. And where do we find this? Well, we find it on the doorway to Modena Cathedral in northern Italy. So this is the very first sculpture of King Arthur. And this is the whole of Arthurian legend here. We've got all of the knights here on the left and the right of the round table besieging Guinevere. This is Guinevere, and this is Mordred, the son of Arthur, in a castle. And yeah, this is pure Arthurian legend, and we know who these are because they've got the names. I wonder if I can zoom in a little bit there. We've got all the names above here, so you can see who the knights are. This one here, without armor, that's King Arthur. And then we've got the castle. This is Guinevere. Here she's called Wengeli, which we know as Guinevere.
And this is about 1,000 years old?
Yeah, this is 12th century. So it's literally, it's almost the same era as Geoffrey of Monmouth. Very, very early. And you can see they're all in Norman armor. Can you see they've got the Norman chain mail?
Yes.
And if we look on this side, we've got the kite shields of the Normans, which is exactly what they would have had when, this sculpture was made and when Arthurian legend was first made. So this is very, very early. And this is the castle. The castle, of course, this is a famous tale from Arthurian legend when Guinevere is either abducted by the son of Arthur or by Lancelot, and they go and hide in a castle, the Castle of Sorrows. The Dolorous Castle, I think it's known, the Dolorous Tower. So we get the lady in the tower. So yeah, this is the earliest. Oh, and here's a close-up of King Arthur from that very frieze. For some reason, he's the only one without armor. He does have a shield. His shield is there, but he doesn't have any chain mail on. And you can just see the top here are for Arturus. You can just see his name there. And this is the tower up the top with a very sorrowful looking Winogi. You can just see above it. That's Guinevere. And Marduk, who is the son of Arthur. So yes, why do we find the earliest sculpture of King Arthur in Italy? And then we go down to the toe of Italy and we find the same frieze. So this is at Bari, which is in southern Italy. And this is the second earliest sculpture of King Arthur. And you can see it's a copy of the one we've just seen, really. We've got the knights on both sides going up to the castle at the top. And the castle, I love this castle. Yeah, it's not a very good photo. But anyway, can you see it's got a padlock on the front of it?
Oh, yeah.
It's got a medieval padlock. And the two little characters in the castle. And again, all of the knights are in Norman armor with the kite shields, the traditional kite shields. So this is Bari down in southern Italy. And again, this is 12th century. This is very early. This is at the very beginning of Arthurian legend. And again, it's in Italy. And then we get this one, Rex Arturus. So we don't need to go searching in Wales for Rex Arturus because this is in Otranto. Again, this is in southern Italy. Very early mosaic, of course, this time of King Arthur. And he's actually named along with, and all of the other people in this mosaic are all biblical characters. So we've got, I think this is Cain and Abel over here and various other biblical type characters. And he's not even on a horse. He's on some sort of stag. I don't know why Arthur would be on a stag, but anyway, you can see it's a cloven hoof animal. So again, from southern Italy. So the problem here is that Arthur is not a British story, and it's not written in English or Celtic or anything else, or Welsh or whatever they want, because when you look at the original texts, what we find is, I mean, when you read it all the way through Arthurian legend, there are always legends and texts being written, which the Knights of the Round Table have to decipher, and every text is written in Chaldean. Aramaic, yes.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we come to one of the most famous people in Arthurian legend, of course, the father of King Arthur, who is called Uther Pendragon. We all know that from childhood. We know it's Uther Pendragon, except his name is not Uther Pendragon at all. So this is a very early manuscript. This is the Geoffrey of Monmouth manuscript. I think this is written obviously in longhand in Welsh. So this is the Welsh version. And the father of King Arthur is called Uther Pendragon, son of the fish. Interesting, isn't it? And then we come.
So dragon is fish in Aramaic.
Yes.
Wow.
Dagon, the dragon, is a fish. And of course, in this one, this is another one. This is written in Latin, I think, this one. And it's Uther Ben Dragon. It's nothing to do with Pendragon at all. Two separate words, Ben Dragon, son of the fish. So it's not a Welsh story at all. We're talking about Aramaic here. He was the son of the fish. And of course, he was the son of the fish because if you look at the birth epic for King Arthur, it has this Herculean conception story for King Arthur. And then there is a portent in the sky, which was a comet with two rays coming out of it. One ray signified King Arthur and the other ray Queen Guinevere, because they were brother and sister. Well, where do we get two rays in the sky as a portent?
Pisces.
Pisces. Because he was Ben Dragon. He was the son of the fish. Because Pisces had just become the dominant constellation in AD 10. If we're talking about first century now, not 6th century, if we're talking about first century, the great month of Pisces began in AD 10.
Mm-hmm.
Aries, the great month of Aries turned into the great month of Pisces in AD 10. That's why Jesus was born as a Lamb of God, but became a fisher of men. That's why all the way through Arthurian legend, the main line of kings is the line of fisher kings, because they were the kings of Pisces. But you can see we've got the two rays. So the portent in the sky, which foretold King Arthur, was two rays. Here's one ray, and here's the other ray. That is how we draw Pisces. But not only that, whoever originally wrote Geoffrey of Monmouth's story that contains this had been to Egypt and saw this in Egypt. I'm convinced of that, because one ray ended in King Arthur, the other ray ended in Queen Guinevere. Well, that's exactly what we get on the Dendera mosaic zodiac. So here is Pisces. You can see the two rays of Pisces. And this is an Egyptian zodiac that goes back to, I think it's 300 BC or so. It's Ptolemaic. So this is even earlier than Arthurian legend and earlier than anything to do with the gospel story. And you can see the two rays going out. But one ray ends in Isis. This is Isis, Queen Isis. And the other ray ends in Horus, King Horus. So the Arthurian story is a copy of this zodiac, because most zodiacs don't have this. Only in this zodiac do we have the two rays of Pisces ending up with a king and a queen. Whoever wrote Arthurian legend had been to the Dendera temple in Egypt and seen this zodiac, which is a hidden zodiac. If you've ever been there, it's in a hidden room up the top of the temple, in a very strange little location that literally it's a room you can only get 10 people in. And here it is in someone's made this nice little diagram of it. And I've drawn some circles on it because it's processional. But if we zoom in a little bit, you can see in the center here are the two rays for Pisces. And one is ending in Isis, and the other is the symbol for Horus. This is the eye of Horus, this one. And this is Isis. So the Arthurian story is now drawing upon Egyptian traditions and gospel traditions, because who was the first king of Pisces? Well, the first king of Pisces was King Jesus, of course, the fisher of men. And this would have been known about in the Ptolemaic era, because we think this zodiac was made before the first century, because you can predict this in advance. I mean, obviously, you know the precession of the equinox, so you know where the constellations are going to end up. And the axis of this zodiac, you can see the main axis goes straight up here, right through Pisces. So this is a processional zodiac. This is the Dendera zodiac. and it's pointing at AD 10, because we know when Pisces arose in the night sky, because you can plug it into any planet. If you've got a good planisphere at home on your computer that has precession within the planisphere, then you can see this for yourself. And the secondary axis, because we've got two circles here on this, you can see these are all the zodiac signs. All the ones in purple are the zodiac signs. And you can see they're misplaced from the center of the zodiac. And they're deliberately misplaced because there are two circles in the heavens above. We have the zodiac circle, which is the red one here. And then if we draw its partner, which is the precessional circle, and where they intersect, you get this vesica piscis. They've squashed it a little bit. It should be a bit wider than that, because the conjunction is normally half the circle, and we're not going half the circle here. So anyway, but for sake of squashing it all into one zodiac, they've made it like this. And the secondary axis, you can see where the two circles intersect, is Aries. Or rather, should I say, it's the conjunction between Taurus and Aries, the ram.
Yeah.
And that signifies another specific date, and that specific date is 1750 BC. That's when we ended up with the shepherd kings in Egypt, because they knew that the great month had turned to Aries. That's why the patriarchs in the Old Testament were called shepherds, because they knew that the great month had turned to Aries in 1750 BC. So this is a precessional zodiac, which marks the old the old great month, which began in 1750, and the new great month, which was going to begin in AD 10. And that came to be, of course, when King Jesus was born in about AD 10 or AD 6 or something of that nature. When the prophecy was fulfilled, of course, and we ended up with the Lamb of God who became the new Fisher King, the Fisher of Men. And that's why we get all the Fisher Kings within Arthurian story. And we know they were following the zodiac, because this is the zodiac, we've talked about this before, that belonged to Jesus. This was the zodiac at Hammeta, which belonged to Jesus of Gamala Saphias, who was said to be the leader of 600 rebel fishermen.
Sorry, Ralph. Apologies to any flat earthers that might be watching this at the moment.
Yeah, because if we zoom in, you see that Helios, the sun, and this is a Jewish zodiac, remember, this is a Nazarene Jewish zodiac. Helios, the sun, is holding a spherical blue earth in his gravitational grasp. So this is the earth. So they knew the heliocentric model of the solar system. And we know it's spherical because it's white on this side and dark on this side. That would only happen with a sphere. And you can't see it very well. I'm not sure if I've got a better... Oh, I have got a better image. Let's quickly zoom in here. And this spherical Earth has curved lines of latitude and longitude on it. And that would only happen if it was a sphere, of course. It wouldn't happen if it was a disk. So they knew the Earth was a sphere, and they knew about the heliocentric model of the solar system. So it was all quite sophisticated. They knew quite a lot. This is first century, obviously, this zodiac, because if you look at the head of Helios, it's pointing at the conjunction between Aries and Pisces. So it's pointing at a date of AD 10 yet again. Yeah, so there we go. So that's a quick introduction to why we're talking about the 1st century. And we're talking about the Near East. A very different story, of course, to classical Arthurian legend. But that's what the manuscripts say. You know, that's what they. If you trawl your way through the Vulgate cycle. Now I thought I'd found a book then, but I didn't. If you trawl your way through the Vulgate cycle, if you do get to the Vulgate cycle, I think if you can buy it in volumes, I'm not sure because I had to buy all 10 volumes. But if you can buy it in separate volumes, you could try getting volume 1, which is the history of the Holy Grail. That's the most interesting of all of the volumes in the Vulgate cycle. Yes.
Thank you. Brilliant. That was absolutely mind-blowingly fascinating. Thank you for that. Do we have any questions in the chat box for Ralph? I'll just quickly have.
Did we answer all your? Because you had a bunch of questions.
I did, but I think you've answered them, Ralph. I'll just go through them very quickly just to double check. But I mean, we have looked at some of the cosmological and astrological aspects of the Arthur story. We've done Hercules, and you've mentioned many books this evening that you had to research and read while you were writing the Grail Cypher. I think really that's pretty much it. Well, but I can take some.
We haven't done the round table, have we?
No, I didn't include that in my questions. We can talk about that definitely.
Yeah, we could have a bit of a round table. So if I go back to screen share, because obviously that's one of the central elements of Arthurian legend, and of course that goes straight back to the 1st century. Because if you read Merlin Grail, I can't see what. Yes, it's very small. You can't really see it. Anyway, if you read Merlin Grail, it says that there were 3 round tables. So the first round table was the table of Oh, yes, it is here. Right. Okay. The first round table was the table of the Last Supper. So the Last Supper table was not a rectangular table as drawn by Leonardo da Vinci. It was actually a circular table. It was a round table. So we have a direct correlation here, of course. So the round table of Jesus was Jesus and his 12 disciples. The second round table, and they were all identical to each other. They were based upon each other. The second round table was the round table of Joseph of Arimathea, who had a round table and his own 12 disciple knights. And then the third round table was the table of King Arthur and his 12 knights. And this round table is a very old one. This is the round table of Edward I. So this is an old table. This is 800 years old. And this is sitting in Winchester, not in the cathedral. It's in the refectory next door, which still stands. So it's still in the same building. And this is was a round table of King Arthur, but of course it's been redrawn to have Henry VIII on it. So it was redrawn in Tudor times, which is why we get the Tudor rose in the middle of it. But King Henry VIII should be sitting in the middle. He shouldn't be sitting on the top of it. He should be in the middle. Because, of course, what do we have here? We have a zodiac. So the round table is actually a zodiac with the 12 constellation knights, disciples of the round Last Supper table, with the king, who is here, is Helios, but the king should be sitting in the center. as an extra place, making it 13 around the outside. It's 12 around the outside, and the king sits in the center. So I'm not sure which film this was, but whatever Arthurian film this came from, they got it right. So there should be a hole in the middle of the table, and King Arthur should be sitting in the middle of the table. Why? Well, because it's a zodiac, and King Arthur. Do I have the? No, I don't. Do I? Do I not? Well, if we look at a zodiac, you can either have it like this, with the sun in the center. That's a common portrayal of a zodiac. That's exactly what they have at Hammeta. Or if you look up at the sky at night and draw the zodiac, what you have in the center is the Great Bear, Ursa Major. Mm-hmm. So you can replace the sun, the Helios character, the son of God. You can replace the sun with the Ursa Major, the Great Bear. And of course, Arthur was named after the Great Bear. So who are you going to stick at the center of a zodiac? You would place Arthur, and that's how he got his name. So it's there is no name change here. It's the same name. It's you either get the kingly Jesus character in the center, the sun, or you get the Great Bear, which is Arthur, Arturus. Here's another zodiac. This is the Bet-Shean zodiac. This is a Christian zodiac. And you can see they've already halfway gone there. So this is on the Sea of Galilee, exactly the same as this one. This is on the Sea of Galilee at Tiberias. This is on the Sea of Galilee at Bet-Shean, on the southern shores of the Sea of Galilee. This is a Christian zodiac. So this is percolated. The first one was 1st century. This one is 6th century. And to make it conform with Christian sensibilities, they have changed the constellations into disciples, monthly disciples, because you can see them. This is now in Greek now. You can see we've got Aprilos, Mayos, Junios, Octobros, Novembros, and Decembros. So using the same months that we have now, this is 6th century, of course, in Greek. And we now have disciple nights instead of constellations. And in the center, we have the sun and the moon. So not just the sun this time, we have a conjunction between the sun and the moon, because these were the king and queen of the heavens above. And so this obviously is Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And the missing piece down here would be their son.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, this is how old these traditions are. And this has been known about for a long time. This is the Last Supper table in a Catholic cathedral, would you believe? Drogheda Catholic Cathedral in Ireland, of all places. And this is a copy of Leonardo da Vinci, of course. But the question is, who is this character on the right-hand side? Who sits on the right-hand side of Jesus? Male or female? Yeah, of course, it's a female. So it's not St. John at all. This is Mary Magdalene. And this has been known about for hundreds of years, of course. We get the same all over Europe. This is from Turku. Turku is the old capital of Finland, where I happen to be living. And this is their main cathedral. And who sits on the right-hand side of Jesus? Yeah, it's Mary Magdalene, of course. Very female. And she's in the colors of the Magdalene. So Mary, the mother, is always in blue and white. Mary Magdalene is always in green and gold, or green and orange. So that's Mary Magdalene yet again. And then Napoleon Bonaparte did the same. He commissioned this, which is a mosaic. It's a very nice mosaic, actually. And it's a copy of Leonardo da Vinci, of course. And who sits on the right-hand side of
And
Jesus?
I think she's even more obviously a female.
Yeah, and if we zoom in,
It's,
here she is.
yeah.
Male or female? Well, nowadays, of course, you can't tell. As Prime Minister Starmer said, he said he couldn't tell the difference because he didn't know what a woman was. But obviously, to rational people, that's a woman, and she sits on the right-hand side of Jesus. So who is that? Mary Magdalene, and she's in the colors of the Magdalene. She's in the green and the gold, or the green and the orange. So yes, going back to your original question, I suppose, who is King Arthur? He is King Jesus. It is a retelling of the story of Jesus. And the problem was, the reason why we got this is because of the Crusades again. We spoke about those just a few minutes ago. The Crusades went to Edessa. The first crusade did not go to Jerusalem immediately. They went across the Euphrates and they went to Edessa. The reason they did so is because of my book, Jesus, King of Edessa. They knew that Jesus was linked to the city of Edessa. And they went there to find information, artifacts, genealogies, something about the Gospels, because you're not going to find secrets of the Gospels down in Jerusalem. If you wanted to find the secrets of the Gospels, they would be in Edessa. And they did. What they found was my book, Jesus, King of Edessa, a very old version of it. And what to do with that story? What they found was the historical truth about King Jesus. But that story was heretical, because that real historical story about Jesus said that he was a king, a real king, not a pretend king, that he was a warrior king, that he fought against Rome, that he was crucified by the Romans, which is exactly what Josephus Flavius says, and that he survived the cross, which is what Josephus Flavius says. So here was a complete real history of King Jesus, the biblical King Jesus, which could not be told because it was too heretical. You would be
Burned
burnt at
alive.
You would be burnt, like the Templar Grand Master Jacques de Molay, burnt at the stake for holding these secrets. So what to do with this story? You can't tell this story. It's utterly heretical. However, you can tell a story about a fictional British king who was fighting the Romans, perhaps, in the Dark Ages, perhaps. And we can have this magnificent court of this royal king with the knights disciples of the round Last Supper table. We can have all of that symbology in this semi-fictional story about King Arthur, and nobody needs to be burnt at the stake for it. And so you can hold this history, you can hold these secrets in plain sight. You don't have to cover it up. But only the initiated will know what on earth the story is about. However, the only people who held the real history and the genealogies and the artifacts and everything else that they discovered in Edessa was the Knights Templar. And that's why the Knights Templar were created. It wasn't, obviously to protect pilgrims on the way to Jerusalem. They were there to hold secrets. The question is, what secrets were they holding? Well, these were the secrets, the deadly secrets that could undermine the Catholic Church, that the Knights Templar were holding within their deep initiations. was this history of the real historical King Jesus.
They were the poor knights of Christ, weren't they? But they became extremely rich.
Extremely rich. Yes, they were called the poor knights of Christ because the Church of Jesus was known as the Ebionites. And the Ebionites are the poor. Ebionites means the poor. So they were known as the poor disciples, the poor knights. And so that's why they christened themselves the poor knights of Christ. They are the Ebionites, the disciples of Jesus. And so those were the secrets that the Knights Templar held. And when you read, of course, von Eschenbach, his story involves the Knights Templar in Arthurian legend, because Wolfram von Eschenbach was a knight himself, maybe even a Templar himself. And so he's even involving the Knights Templar in this story. And that was what this grand secret of the Templars was all about. That's why Jacques de Molay was slow roasted. That's why the Catholic Church made their bold move against the Templars in 1307. So, on Friday the 13th of October, which is why Friday the 13th is still unlucky for some, the Knights Templar were all rounded up. Well, not all of them. Many escaped, of course. Some escaped to Scotland and some escaped to Portugal, and some, so they say, managed to sail to America. We don't exactly know if that's true, but it's a distinct possibility because their navy disappeared. The Templars had a navy at La Rochelle, and that disappeared. It was never found, nor was the treasury that they held in Paris. That wasn't ever found again. Nor were all of the secrets and the artifacts. They would have found artifacts. They would have had genealogies. They would have written genealogies. Would they have written it down? I mean, the whole reason for making this a verbal transmission is because then you don't have any incriminating evidence that can be used against you. So maybe they didn't write it down, apart from writing down all of Arthurian legend. And that's why you get people like William of Newburgh, which I quoted before, saying that this was a complete fantasy, that Walter of Oxford and Geoffrey of Monmouth had made up the story completely, because he was correct. Walter of Oxford did make it up completely. He made this story about King Jesus and reset it into the Dark Ages and said he was some sort of British king. And all of this was set in Britannia, not in the Near East, as far as you could possibly get within the Roman Empire, of course, from the true location of these events. They recast it into Britain and recast it into a place that had had a very similar revolt, of course, because they had had the Druids revolt in the early AD 60s, which was very similar to the Jewish revolt in the late AD 60s. Both of these revolts happened in the same decade. And the Druids were wiped out by the Romans, and then the Jews were nearly completely wiped out by the Romans in the same decade. And it's pertaining to the same sort of story. And so that is why I think Arthurian legend was written, which is why nobody can find any evidence of it in here. And that is why, of course, we looked at the European aspect of this story. That is why all of the stories, all the manuscripts that we get of Arthurian legend come from Holland and Greece and Italy and Spain and Portugal. And of course, France, loads from France, and Germany with Eschenbach, of course. Anywhere except Britain. All of the manuscripts come across from Europe. And the early sculptures, again, they come from Europe. Why? Well, because the Knights Templar were a European-wide organization. They weren't really based in Britain. They were more based in in France than anywhere else. And of course, a lot came from, a lot would have come from Italy because of Roger I, who was the, the Norman king of Italy in the 10th century AD. Because in the Italian version, they make King Arthur into Roger I. So instead of King Arthur being a British king, their King Arthur is an Italian king who's buried in Mount Etna. So if you want to go burying yourself in Mount Etna, anyway, that's where the Italian King Arthur is buried, mainly because Italy was ruled by the Normans at that time. The Normans got everywhere, and that's why you get so many redheads in Italy as well as redheads in Ireland and
The
Scotland and
Normans were
everywhere else.
descended from the Norsemen, weren't they?
Yes, the Normans were the Northmen. Yeah, the
Mm.
Norsemen. They came from the north. They were Scandinavians who took over northern France, but they also took over the Isle of Man and much of sort of eastern Ireland, and they took over southern Italy, and Sicily was all Norman. And then a lot of the soldiers in Constantinople, they were all Normans as well. So they did sort of rather get everywhere. And that's why we get this European aspect to Arthurian legend. That's why it's a European story. It's not a British story. But of course, the Arthurian purists don't want to hear that because they've been brought up on this idea that, Arthur was a Dark Age king, that he was Welsh, most probably, British at the very least. But the evidence contradicts that time and time again. Even just reading the texts, a lot of these texts are all about first century events. They're all about Middle Eastern events. I mean, one of the main places they go to, I'm just scanning down my images, is this place. So I'll do a quick screen share. So there's a long story about Joseph of Arimathea and Josephus, again, these two characters who wrote this story. Josephus Flavius wrote the story in the 1st century, and they go to Sarras. And Sarras is the city of the eunuchs, because, we've not been through the wounded kings, have we?
We haven't, no. This is the bit where I normally start wincing, but please continue.
There was the cult of the eunuchs, and we had the eunuch kings, which were the wounded kings. Anyway, the knights go to Sarras, which was one of the main cities that they had to go to, and Sarras lies between Jerusalem and Babylon. Again, nothing to do with Wales. Anyway, city of Sarras means the city of the eunuchs, and from its geographical descriptions, this was Palmyra. Palmyra is in eastern Syria. This is the Temple of Bel in Palmyra. I was one of the last people to see this.
Very sad, yeah.
Yeah, because ISIS blew it up. So yeah, it is no longer. It does not exist anymore.
Tragic.
So this is, part of the reason, we have these many mentions of the eunuch priests, and I've got some quotes here, because they were called the Galileans. Again, this is where we tuck ourselves back. I shouldn't say tuck ourselves back in, should I? This is where we get links to the biblical story again, because the Galileans were the eunuch priests of Kibel.
Yes.
And of course, Jesus was a Galilean. But we know who the Galileans were because they were the eunuch priests, and that's why Jesus said to his disciples, this is from from the Gospels, Matthew 19:12. Jesus says to his disciples, there are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb, and there are some eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs. There's a third category there somewhere, which I've missed out for some reason. There are some eunuchs which were so born from their mother's womb. Yes, so you're just born as a eunuch. There are some eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, it should say. And there are some eunuchs who have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. So what Jesus is saying, he's addressing his disciples here, is if you can castrate yourself, you should do so for the kingdom of heaven's sake. Now, why would Jesus be saying that? Well, because we had the cult of the Galley, the Galileans, who were the eunuch priests of Kibel. And only the high priests and the main high priest had to be eunuchs. They had to be castrated. And we know all about these people because we're told all about them by Lucian and Josephus. So Lucian says, he's a Roman historian, on these days, men become Galley. While some are playing flutes and performing the rites, a frenzy comes upon many, and he throws off his clothes and rushes to the center with a great shout, and takes up a sword and castrates himself. He then rushes through the city holding his testicles in his hands, and he takes female clothing and women's adornments from whichever house he throws his testicles into. So if you're sitting there, having afternoon tea and a set of gonads come flying through the window, then you have to give them a dress. Might sound a bit peculiar, but I mean, we've seen more peculiar things than that, I think, on London streets nowadays. But and these people were known as the Galley, or as Josephus Flavius calls them, the Galileans. And do remember that Jesus was a Galilean. Have a look. Oh no, we'll come to that one in a minute. Anyway, Josephus says of this, because it's all to do with the Jewish revolt, which is what I say that Jesus was involved in. Jesus as the king of Edessa, who was called King Esus. Jesus was said to be a Galilean in Luke 23:6, if anyone wants to look it up. But Josephus says, these Galileans indulged themselves in feminine wantonness. They decked their hair and put on women's garments. They had paints under their eyes and intimated not only the ornaments, but also the lusts of women. While their faces looked like the faces of women, they killed with their right hands. And while their gait was effeminate, they attacked men and became warriors, and drew their swords from under their finely dyed cloaks, and ran everybody through whom they alighted upon. So there is no contradiction here between these people being knights of the Round Table and also being Galley priests, because the Galley priests were warriors. They had swords underneath their dresses, and they were prepared to kill their enemies whom they alighted upon. And of course, the main eunuch knight of the Round Table was Sir Percival. Now, if you read Arthurian legend, you'll probably see Percival and Galahad, but it's quite obvious from the books I was reading that that is the same person. So we have Sir Percival, who is the young, perfect, naive young knight. When we get that all the way through, he's portrayed as a bit of a bumpkin sometimes. It's quite funny, the stories about Percival. He really doesn't. He's not a worldly person, put it that way.
He didn't last long on the Bridge of Death in the Holy Grail, Monty Python.
Oh, right. Well, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. So he was just perfect for becoming the high priest, because the high priest had to be virginal, perfect, innocent, and castrated. And so he was perfect for that. And that's exactly what it says. So Percival was tempted by the devil in the guise of a woman. Unsurprising, I suppose. Am I allowed to say that? Who is tempting him into sex, of course. And the only way he can stop this temptation is to castrate himself, which he does. And so he ends up with being exactly the same as the wounded king. So all the way through Arthurian legend, the wounded king is wounded between the thighs. So it's pretty obvious what the wounded king is. And that's why he was called Galahad, because he became the Galley. And the Galley were, as we've said, the eunuch priests of Cibele. And Galahad means the chief galley. And so Percival became Galahad. So it was a title that was tacked on to his name. So they're not two separate knights. In my books, he is called Sir Percival the Galahad. And he is the Red Knight. And you might think this is all a bit daft because, oh, what's all this about? We've got these knights charging around in red dresses. What's all that about? Well, we still do the very same today, don't we? And this is a bishop or maybe even higher, I don't know, he might be a cardinal, going into St. Peter's in Rome. And of course, he is a Galahad. He is a knight in a red dress, who is part of the same church that they were describing. He would be one of the knights of the Round Table. And possibly castrated. We don't know. We didn't ask. And this is what they do in India too. So these are the Galley. In India, they're called the Hijra. And of course, they do exactly the same today as they used to do in the 1st century. So they castrate themselves. In fact, a lot of these go further than castration, as did the 1st century as well, because we think they had a penectomy as well. And these Hijra do, because Saul, St. Paul, makes this comment in the epistles, because Saul was against circumcision, although we think this circumcision was rather more than circumcision. But anyway, he says, look, because he used to mock them. Remember, Saul was the enemy of the Church of Jesus and James. They were at each other's throats most of the time. So Saul says, well, if the church of the circumcised, he calls them, if the circumcised like circumcision so much, why don't they just cut off their penis and have done with it? So he's quite obviously familiar with this, the Galley Hijra, who actually have a penectomy as well. So it's not just castration. It goes, one step further. Anything more to say about that? Anyway, that's the origins of the cult of the wounded king. The wounded king is a line of kings, and they're conflated quite a lot as well. So you will find the Fisher King and the wounded king are mentioned, and they're often the same person. The Fisher King obviously is the king of Pisces, and the wounded king means he's a castrated king of Pisces.
Do we know why or how this practice originated?
Well, yeah, it goes back to, because we have various histories of the Galley and the Nazarene. Now the Galley took their cue from Cibele, who used to consort with Attis. And Attis, of course, was the castrated godlet of Queen Attis. And Attis, really, I suppose she's an incarnation of Isis. So Isis had many different incarnations, She obviously became Aphrodite and Venus and Astarte and Ashtoreth. They're all based on Isis, because the name for Isis in Egyptian is Ast, which is where we get Astoreth and Astarte and all of these, and Easter, and Esther, of course, the Queen Esther. It all refers to the stars. So Aster, as we use today, an asterisk is a star. We still use the same terminology today. So I think that Attis was just an incarnation, a different. She was prevalent in Edessa. Remember, she was the patron goddess of Edessa. So we're back to Edessa again.
Okay.
And Atargatis as well. She linked with another goddess and became Atargatis. And she was the great mother goddess, a little bit like Isis was, of course, and also the protector of cities and so on. And her consort was Attis, who was a young man who was castrated himself. But this goes back further, I think, because I think we're going all the way back. Because if you look at the Galley and the Galileans and their belief system, they believed in the primeval Adam. And the primeval Adam was either hermaphrodite or androgynous. I think mostly he was androgynous, so he had no sex at all. So, and they believed in the primeval Adam. And again, this links back to my other books, of course, where I said that Adam and Eve were Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And of course, if you look at the images of Akhenaten, you will find, and I've probably got some images here if I just look very quickly, looking at Akhenaten. Let's go to this one and open up a few. Right, so here's the images. So if I go back into, I've got to put it in that page, otherwise it won't show. So if I do a screen share, right, so here's the tree of life. I'm not sure if we probably discussed this many years ago. This is the tree of life, which occurs, of course, within the story of Adam and Eve. And you can see the Thoth is inscribing the fruits, and this is actually Seti the First, and the fruits on the tree of life had the name of the pharaoh on it. So there we go. That's where that came from. Here's Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and here they are naked. So yes, on the right we have a daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and quite obviously she is naked, apart from some diaphanous robe, I think you might call it. In the center is Nefertiti herself, in her 40s, I would say, something of this nature. Now, this is an official portrait, because nobody would be so bold as to make an image of the king and the queen without getting their permission. And the queen obviously said, well, draw me naked. And that's exactly what they did. So this is a naked Nefertiti. And here is a naked Akhenaten. And you can see he has no genitalia. At least they're not drawn on this statue. You can see his navel. There is no clothing. And he has no nuts. So it's likely, and this, of course, is why we get the story of Adam and Eve being naked in the Garden of the Arten, the Garden of Eden, because their god was the Arten, or the Eton would be a better pronunciation, who had a sacred garden in Amarna, and they were the naked lovebirds in the Garden of the Eton, the Garden of Eden. That's where we get the story from. But going back to Arthurian legend and the Galley, Akhenaten was probably a castrated or a eunuch or a androgynous who had cut his bits off. So the first primeval Adam, who was androgynous, or some say hermaphrodite, or at the very least castrated, was most probably Akhenaten, and that's who they were looking back towards for their inspiration, because he was the primeval Adam. He was Adam and Eve. And I think that's where the story comes back from, because remember, all of this came out of Egypt. It came out of Akhenaten. He was the first of the monotheists. That's where we get monotheism from. That's where we get the story of Moses and Aaron from. And a lot of this story all comes out of the history of Akhenaten. And I think that's what the Galley were looking back to in their history. They were looking to the history of Akhenaten, and they were trying to imitate Akhenaten.
And did somebody come along a long time afterwards and try and copy them? I'm thinking of was it Bhagwan and
oh yes,
Sheila?
yes. I don't have a picture of that. Yes, but if anyone wants to, I'll stop that. There we go. If anyone wants to see the history of Akhenaten, because it's such a long time ago, it's very difficult to sort of put yourself in their place, what was happening at the time, and how was all of this happening. It all seems a bit peculiar. Well, if you just watch the story, as you say, is he called the Bagram?
Yes, very close, if not.
Yeah. The film is a Netflix film, which is called Wild Wild Country, and it gives the history of this guru from India who had this following, and as they often do in India, but he was thrown out of India and started up a new colony in Ohio, was it? Anyway, somewhere in deepest America. And with all of his followers, he moved there with his 1,000 followers, however many he had. And of course, that story is exactly the same as what Akhenaten was doing. He was kicked out by his father, Amenhotep III, and so he moved to central Egypt with his little colony of followers, 80,000 according to Manetho, and they set up their own little hippie commune in the middle of Egypt, which we know today as Amarna. And he sort of played the mock pharaoh there for several years while his father was still alive. But then when his father died, he actually made a pitch to becoming the pharaoh of Egypt, which he successfully did. And so we had this hippie commune, and the whole of Egypt being run by this hippie. But then, of course, with the fervor of these people, moving to this new location and making their new city, everything sort of ground along fairly well for a while. But then it all started to fall apart. You get all of these factions developing and fractious sort of infighting going on between various groups. And if you watch the story of Wild Wild Country, the whole thing fell apart. Instead of being a hippie commune, they had armed guards on every street. It went very quickly from being a hippie commune into being a fascist state.
The neighbours weren't very keen on the idea, were they?
No, they tried to poison the local town. I mean, it got totally out of hand. And so the whole thing dissolved. The whole thing failed. And all of the people had to go away on an exodus. Well, that's exactly what happened to Akhenaten. The whole thing eventually failed, and they all had to go on a second exodus. And they went up to northern Egypt, which we've spoken of before. So, yeah, that's the history of Akhenaten. But he was very influential with this new creed he had created, his new monotheism. And that monotheism lasted all the way through Judaism into Christianity. And so some people who were in the know were honoring this great hero who had created Judaism, or half created Judaism. And his name was Akhenaten. And he's known to the Galileans as the primeval Adam, the first Adam. So yeah, I think that's where this history comes from. And of course, Jesus being the Egyptian false prophet who was educated in Egypt, probably in Alexandria, would have known all about this. And then he came out of Egypt, of course, out of Egypt I have called my son. He came back into Judea aged, well, at an early age, age 12 or 14.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just returning to Arthur, something that I haven't asked you is where King Isas / Arthur ended up, or ended his days. But we're coming up to 2 hours now, so I think probably maybe we'll, if I get the opportunity to speak to you again, that's something else I can ask you.
Yes, yeah, that's a whole,
yeah,
that's a whole talk in itself, because I
Yeah.
say he went to Britain. Of course, he ended up in Britannia.
Okay. The chat box has been off the charts this evening. There's been so many comments, it's crazy.
Oh, you got any questions there?
There's been a couple, I think. I've lost one of them because I think I've lost the first part of the chat from this evening. I don't know if that's YouTube or it's run out of space or something like that. I don't know. I believe the first question I saw was from Daniela Holland, and she asked the question, is there any connection between Hector and Hercules?
I don't know. I would have to think about that. Yes, I mean, they were most probably evoking the Greek gods, of course, in their battles. Quite possibly. I would have to look at that. I don't know offhand.
Okay. I'm just scrolling down very quickly. Most people this evening have debated politely, so thank you for that. One or two exchanges have become a little bit heated, which is a shame.
Well, to be expected.
Yeah.
I am pushing the envelope slightly.
We have a question from Hugh Evans, who has said, Ralph, expand on the historical support R is giving to a third party. Lord knows we need some help.
I think he might know what I might know what he's alluding to, but I don't think we want to discuss that here, actually.
Right, okay, let's get rid of that then. Any questions for Ralph? I'm still scrolling. There's a long way to go. Lots and lots of questions. Well, I'll tell you what, if I can't find any more, then if we get the opportunity to speak again, then I'll perhaps save them up for the next show. No, that's not one. Okay, I think I'll have to draw a close now. No, that's not a question. Hide that. Sorry, Ralph. Okay, there's just so many comments to scroll through at the moment. It's hard to keep up.
Yes, people went. If you write normal comments in lowercase and then questions in uppercase, they stand out a little bit more.
Yeah, somebody earlier was saying that Hercules was Hugh Gadan. Have you come across Hugh Gadan before?
No, I haven't. No.
He's a character mentioned in connection with a migration to this country from the Middle East, I think around 4000 BC.
Right. Is this? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to go through them again off camera and if they couldn't, so they could have the time. Here's one. Natural Explorer has asked, if they occurred in the same decade, how is the timing of the Jewish revolt related to a revolt by Druids?
Well, yes. I don't know if there was any cooperation between the two, or whether it was just coincidence, but the Druids had their big battle with the Romans in the early AD 60s. And of course, the Druids were wiped out. They all ended up on Anglesey, which is a little island off the coast of Wales. And they were utterly defeated there. But the wiping out of it may well have affected what happened in Judea, because the wiping out of the Druids ended up with the revolt by Boudicca, of the Iceni.
Mm.
And that revolt, because the Romans went in hard with the Druids and wiped them out, that revolt by the Iceni almost ended up in the whole of Roman Britain being destroyed. Because Boudicca's forces went around the whole of eastern Britain. They burnt 6 Roman cities completely to the ground. They killed thousands and thousands of Romans and Anglo-Romans. It was a complete disaster.
Mm.
So the Jewish revolt happened only like 5 years later. And so it's probably in the back of their mind of the Roman, of Rome and the Roman legions, that perhaps they shouldn't go in quite so hard as they did with the Druids.
Mm.
And so when you look at the history of the Jewish revolt, Vespasian is only going through picking off odd towns here and there, and then having deals with other towns who surrendered, and he was accepting their surrender and slowly making his way through the whole of Judea and Samaria until he got to Jerusalem. So instead of just wiping everybody out, which they could easily have done, they went softly all the way down through Judea until they got to Jerusalem. So that may well have affected Vespasian's strategy, that they didn't want to make the same mistake that they had in Britannia. But I don't think there was any cooperation, as it were. There was no exchange in that fashion.
Very interesting. A question from Biker Bulldogs. What makes Britain great? Question: has Ralph studied the Welsh histories, Book of Hergest, Lives of the Saints, the Mabinogion?
Yes, and they don't contain anything about King Arthur. So, I go through all of those old manuscripts, and you will find, this manuscript mentions King Arthur, and you find it's just one sentence with the name of Arthur just poked into it somewhere.
Mm.
That none of these histories have the history of Arthur. You get these odd mentions of an Arthur, which I think is an odd mention of Hercules, basically a sort of Hercules lookalike. But there is no Arthurian story. There is no Camelot. There is no Round Table. There is no Court of Arthur. There's no Lancelot and Guinevere. There's none of that story in any of these Welsh manuscripts.
Mm.
So just to pick out the little name Arthur somewhere in some obscure manuscript is not the Arthurian story. And so we don't really get an Arthurian story. In fact, we don't get any Arthurian story until we get to Geoffrey of Monmouth and Walter of Oxford. And Walter of, because one of your questions was about Tysilio.
Yes.
The Tysilio document was supposed to be a 7th century guy called Tysilio, but I think every historian nowadays says that it was nothing to do with Tysilio. It's a later document, not from the 7th century. And when you read it, it is exactly the same as Geoffrey of Monmouth. It's exactly this. It's not word for word, but it's exactly the same story. One is more prosaic. So Walter of Oxford is more prosaic, and Geoffrey of Monmouth is much more a proper fictional story. These made it into a nice readable story.
He throws in some mermaids and some sirens, doesn't he?
Oh, all sorts of things into it, and it links it back. Well, mind you, so does Walter of Oxford. I call it Walter of Oxford because the manuscript, if you read that particular manuscript, I think it's the Oxford one, because there's a few of these manuscripts knocking around and all slightly different. But it says it was written by Walter of Oxford, not Tysilio. And at the end of it, it says that Walter of Oxford got the manuscript from Brittany. And it reads as if the manuscript from Brittany came across and was given to 2 people, Walter of Oxford and Geoffrey of Monmouth, and they both borrowed this same manuscript and made their own versions of it. Because they're so alike, it's untrue. They're just two versions of the same story. So I don't think it's anything to do with Tysilio at all. It's a manuscript from about 1135 by Walter of Oxford.
Okay. Mark McThree has asked the question, was Hadrian's Wall to keep the English out of Scotland, so they had to pay tax?
About time too, I would say, yes. Yeah, well, that's slightly before this. Well, it's after the Arthurian era. Yes, Hadrian's Wall. Doesn't really pertain much to this story. It's interesting because in my book, I have to go through some of this early material to see what Rome was doing in Britannia, because that's one of the reasons the Arthurian story was set in Britannia, because Rome was doing similar things in Britannia to what they were doing in the East. And we had these rebellions against Rome, the same as King Jesus of Edessa had his rebellion against Rome in Judea. We had these rebellions as well. We had this rebellion, as we were talking about earlier, by Magnus Maximus. That's about 390. And then we had the rebellion by Constantine III, which is about Magnus Maximus must have been earlier than that. Constantine III was about 390. And he was another usurper of Rome. He became emperor, Constantine III. He was a British emperor. And he campaigned through France, and he took over the whole of Spain as well, in his own name as Constantine III. And it is Constantine III who is linked onto Arthurian story by Geoffrey of Monmouth. So it was a son of Constantine III, who was Constans, the monk. And it's from they added in another brother, another son of this emperor, who was Uther Pendragon. So he would have been a brother of Constans the monk. So they've tacked this story onto the history of Constantine III, who is a real British king who tried to take over Rome in about 390, 400. I think their campaign down through France and Spain was in about 405 AD, and this is when Rome gave up their control of Britannia because it was getting too expensive. Britannia, as I said before, was a strange part of a strange province because of Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall, because of the Scots rampaging all the time in the north. We had more Romans in Britannia than any other part of the Roman Empire. So, we had like 3 legions were knocking around in Britain most of the time in order to keep the rebellious Welsh and the rebellious Scots at bay. So that made Britain very expensive to run. As far as the Romans were concerned, they were having to expend a lot of money on legions in Britannia. But it also made Britannia dangerous because the power in Rome was through the legions. And do you trust your legions to be loyal? Well, there weren't too many legions knocking around, but Britain had 3 of them. And on a couple of occasions, they proved themselves not to be entirely loyal and tried to take over the whole of the Roman Empire. And the revolt by Constantine the Third was one of those. And it's Constantine the Third's revolt that is linked into Arthurian history. But of course, I say that wasn't true. The real revolt was by the Edessan kings, who tried to do exactly the same, but they tried to do it in the Roman East instead of the Roman West. So it's very much the same story. You can see how they can link the two together to turn itself into Arthurian legend.
Fascinating. Was Constantine the Great British?
Yeah, this was a different Constantine, remember. So Constantine
Oh
was
no, I'm just
yeah.
going back to another Constantine.
No, he wasn't British, but he was crowned, of course, in York. So lots of people in Britain said, yeah, he's our emperor because he was crowned in York. So, you know, he was British.
Was he educated there though?
Possibly. It spent quite a long time there. Did he have a British wife or something, or was it a British mother?
Well,
I
his
can't quite
mother was
remember.
Helena of the Cross, but I think the orthodox position on her is that she was a Club Med barmaid.
Yes, quite possibly. Well,
Yeah.
that's another thing that I disagree with, because I don't think his mother was Helena. I think what was happening here is that Queen Helena, the famous Queen Helena, was Queen Helena of the 1st century, Queen Helena of Edessa.
Mm-hmm.
She was the very famous Queen Helena, and she is the woman who went on a pilgrimage around Judea looking for her son, King Jesus. So that's a bit of a problem. We want to wipe Queen Helena from history. We don't want anyone talking about Queen Helena. How do you do that? Well, you say, that was the mother of Constantine I, wasn't it? It's nothing to do with Queen Helena of Edessa. We'll scrub her from history completely. Nobody knows about her now. I mean, if you go around Jerusalem, you never see a statue to Queen Helena. And
But
yet,
she's, sorry to interject there, Ralph, but she's got the biggest tomb in Jerusalem.
yep, and the biggest palace as well.
Yeah.
But even if you go to the excavations on the palace, they're excavating her palace right now.
Wow.
It's called the Giovanni parking lot excavation. It's not called the excavation of Queen Helena's palace. She is still scrubbed from history. She is the woman who saved all of Judea from famine.
Yeah.
She is the queen who donated the solid gold menorah to the temple. The solid gold menorah, which is now on the Arch of Titus in Rome, an image of it, of course. So she was very famous in the era, but of course, the Christian popes didn't want you to know about that, because that was getting too close to my Jesus of Edessa story. And so she had to be wiped from history. And the easy way to do that was to say, it was Constantine's mother. She was the Helena that was looking for the cross. So I'm not entirely sure that really was her name.
Okay, thank you, Ralph. The questions have been flying in now, and we're over, yes, which is typical, because I don't want to keep you for too much longer, because
if you've got a few more, I can answer a few more.
Cheers, thank you. Okay.
You can always split it into 2 videos or something.
Well, this is live. You do know that, don't you?
Oh, I didn't know that, no.
I'm sure I told you, yes, this is a live stream. So
I would have advertised it. Never mind.
Okay. Well, it will still be on the channel afterwards.
That's true.
I saw a question from Stinky Paradox. Let me just see if I can find that, because I don't want to miss his question. I won't be able. There it is. I found it. Right. Question for Ralph. Is Galahad connected to the Ermine fur? If he can go over the Greek term for Ermine, and how, I hope I'm saying that right, and how that infers castration.
Yeah, this is
Ermine.
Ermine, yeah.
Yeah.
There is a connection there. I can't quite remember the connection. I did write something about this. There is a very famous painting about a Italian count and the ermine. I've got one of these, which is struggling with me at present. Hey, what are you doing? Go down, young
Lovely
dog.
looking fella.
And there's this famous painting about this Italian count and the ermine. And the question is, no, it's the wife and the ermine. Why is she holding an ermine? And it's because there is a great symbolism by the ermine. And I can't quite remember what the symbolism is. It could be something to do with castration. It could be something to do with him being a king or something of that nature. but there is a deeper meaning. All of these paintings, they're not just paintings, you know, there's always some symbolism deep within these paintings that has some connection. And yeah, it could be one of the reasons why they still use ermine fur for all of the you know, the politicians and whatever, and the royalty, because it has this symbolism. I don't know if anyone's looked that up and had a quick look for symbolism of the ermine. But yeah, these various symbols can be quite fascinating sometimes. Everyone is now Googling for the ermine. It's called Lady with an Ermine. It's a portrait painting of oh, it's by Leonardo da Vinci. That's why it's a famous that's why it's a famous painting. It's a Da Vinci painting of Cilicia Gallerani. Oh, she's a galley. Well, there we go. Yes, she's a galley. So yes, it could well pertain then to castration. So this was in Milan. We're talking about 15th century. So yes, if it's done by Leonardo and it's something to do with castration, it's got to be a deep symbolism there somewhere. I'm not sure if it's going to say anything about the symbolism. The ermine, it says, symbolic. Yeah, we know it's symbolic. It says it's a symbol of purity and moderation. I think there's more to it than that. Yeah, I don't think Wiki is going to tell you exactly what the true symbolism is, but it's interesting that her name. Oh yes, yes. Okay, here we go. The ancient Greek term for ermine. So the Greek name for an ermine is a galley. So an ermine is a galley. So we're back to everything we've been discussing. So
Yes.
yeah, so it's referring to the galley priests, to castration. So why would this lady be? Unfortunately, I don't have an image of it. I wonder if I can call up an image. So why would this? No, I didn't mean to do that. All. So if I make that a little bit bigger.
Bear with us, everyone.
So if I do a screen share. Actually, I'm yeah, I thought that might happen. I've got multiple us's, but if I do that instead, now can you see her?
Yes.
Okay, that's the Lady in the Ermine by Leonardo da Vinci. So why is the lady holding a galley priest? What's that referring to? Well, Jesus was the Galilean, wasn't he? He was known as a Galilean. You can get that from Luke 23:6, where he's called a Galilean. So if the Ermine is Jesus, then the lady must be Mary Magdalene. Are we in the right sort of ballpark? Because she's holding Jesus.
So. Sorry, we lost that there.
Oh, shall I stop share?
Yeah.
Were you able to hear me there? Because I messed up there.
Yes. Yeah, we did. We could hear you loud and clear.
Right. So, so we've got a lady holding Jesus because Jesus is the Galley and an Ermine is a Galley. So she is holding Jesus. So therefore the woman must be Mary Magdalene. Let's see if I can pick up an image that's better than that. That's better. If I do that, that's much better. Can I make that smaller? There we go. Now I'll be able to see it. I did it in the wrong page, so there we go. Now I can see it. So that's
okay.
Yeah, the lady in the Ermine, and she's nearly in the Magdalene colors. Remember, the Magdalene colors are green and gold, and she's got this, or green and orange, and she's got this blue and orange dress. I don't know. That would make it a much more interesting symbolic picture. So it doesn't have to be about this particular lady, the mistress of Ludovico Sforza, Duke of Milan. It doesn't have to be this lady. If you're going to make a symbolic image, there's nothing nicer than trying to turn that that courtesan of the Count into Mary Magdalene. Yeah, that would make it highly symbolic.
Okay.
Yeah, interesting that, isn't it? Interesting.
Very.
I shall stop share. Back again.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing. Just one little hint there, and we can go down an entire rabbit hole, looking at the symbolism of the Renaissance era.
Yes, definitely. There are more questions, Ralph, but I mean they're never ending now. So, and my dinner is coming through the door in about 5 minutes. So I booked it for 9:30, thinking we'd probably do 2 hours. We're well over that now. We're going to end on this question, I think, from Monica Escobar, who asks Ralph, what does Ralph say to Alan Wilson's Arthurian research?
Yes, dear old Alan Wilson. I'm afraid to say I didn't get on with Alan Wilson that much, and I didn't rate his research that much, and then it got into very bizarre territory later on when he bought this church in Wales, just north of Cardiff somewhere.
St. Peter's.
Yeah, he said it was the burial place of King Arthur. Is that going to come up? That's not sharing, is it? Let me do that again. I was just going to do a quick screen share.
Oh, it's gone. Just as I was about to share it, it's gone.
Oh, okay. I shall do it again. So if I share that. There we go. And at this church, he discovered they've got these 2 stones they found, stones of Arthur. Well, I mean, that inscription doesn't look ancient at all, does it? The trouble is with these inscriptions, most people think they're complete forgeries. So this stone of Arthur, it says Rex Arturus Fili Mauricius, Mauricius, which Wilson and Blackett said meant Arthur, the son of Mauritius, if I get the pronunciation right, Mauritius. But of course, it doesn't say that at all. If you translate it from the Latin, it actually says King Arthur Mauritius of the Sun. So the Latin is bastardized. It doesn't say that at all. And then we come to this cross. They were supposed to have found this cross of Arthur. And this cross is very dubious. It has the wrong symbolism. It's the wrong manufacture, because they would have used lost wax manufacture. They wouldn't have done it like this, this has just been poured into a mold. Made of electrum. They didn't use electrum very much. And this one says on it, pro anima autorius, which they say means for the soul of Arthur. But of course, it doesn't say that at all. It says Arthur for the soul. And as the archaeologist who monitored this said, he said, well, chicken soup would probably be better for the soul than Artorius. Again, it's just very poor Latin. And
but course, could that be down to the inscriber at the time who didn't have a great grasp of Latin, perhaps?
Yeah, but the texts we have that have come out of this era, I mean, if you look at Geoffrey of Monmouth and so on, they were all writing in Latin, and their Latin is pretty good. Remember, this is church Latin. The church would have spoken fairly fluent Latin wherever you are. You can't get anywhere within the Catholic Church without speaking Latin. It wasn't a strange language to people. It was the language of the church. And this is nonsense. And everybody, and this particular artifact, they wouldn't allow anyone to see it. So it's never been examined for the purity, for the type of metals involved. And we don't know what's happened to it now. I mean, what's happened? It's supposed to be a famous and priceless artifact, and it just goes missing.
I think I've heard a rumor, and please forgive me, anyone who's watching this, if I'm getting this wrong, but I'm pretty sure that there's some people say that it ended up in America. How, I'm not too sure. But
I wouldn't be surprised if someone over there would buy it. But all of these shenanigans going on totally put me off his research completely. And then his idea that all Egyptian was Qumru just didn't hold water at all. You know, I've done a substantial amount of research on Egyptian hieroglyphs, so I'm fairly fluent in Egyptian. And I go on these, which is the Wallace Budge.
Oh yes,
Egyptian Hieroglyphic Dictionary.
Yeah.
And you can see they've got thousands and thousands of hieroglyphs. And this is volume 1.
Nice.
And this is volume 2. And if you run through this, there are no connections with Welsh, and yet Wilson was just saying every Egyptian hieroglyph is Welsh. And what he was doing is just taking the hieroglyphic pronunciation of the consonants and just reading that as Welsh, which made the phrases into complete gibberish. Egyptian is not Welsh. If you read these books, it's quite obvious that Egyptian is closely linked to Aramaic and closely linked to Coptic. So wherever you go in this dictionary, you will find, well, I mean, here's two just page at random, and the top two here are Hebrew equivalents. If I can,
yeah, we can just make them out.
yeah.
So
the top one is Baraka, which means to bow the knee, which is we get that from the story of Joseph, where he bows the knee before the Pharaoh. Baraka, well, it's Hebrew, but it's Egyptian as well. And yeah, the second one is Baraka as well. So all the way through, you will find that most Egyptian has an equivalent word in Aramaic and in Coptic, because of Coptic, of course, is a derivative of ancient Egyptian. What you don't find is any words that are comparable with Welsh or Celtic languages. And so I just felt that was totally wrong as well. So no, I didn't really didn't really get along with his thesis of the two Arthurs, and it's all to do with Wales. And he's very Welsh nationalist. But as we've seen, this is not a Welsh story. All of the manuscripts about King Arthur come from all over Europe. All of the sculptures for King Arthur come from Italy. This is really not a Welsh story. And then all of the inscriptions all the way through King Arthurian history are all Chaldean. They're all Aramaic. They're not Welsh. That's what it actually says within the manuscripts. So I didn't believe any of his research. It was too far off the mark for me, and I've proved my own satisfaction that we're talking about a Near Eastern story here that's come back with the Knights Templar, because that's when the story arrives. It arrives like about 10 years after the Knights Templar were founded, and suddenly we get this story.
Okay, well, thank you for that very honest assessment. I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with me this evening. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Pleasure. Glad everyone. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. And if we do have a sequel and talk about the fate of Jesus in Britannia, because that, of course, is linked to the Arthurian story, I can do some more questions and answers then as well.
That would be wonderful. Thank you to everyone who's contributed this evening with your questions. I haven't got through them all, but if we can persuade Ralph to come back on, I'll save them up and ask him in the next episode. Please do like the video, because it helps us to grow. And if you're new around here, do please subscribe to the channel. I will see you next week for episode 41 of the History CV of Britain, where my guest will be Adam Griffiths, and we'll be taking a look at the Colburn alphabet. Okay, thank you, Ralph.
My pleasure.